It started with a single sentence that made my stomach drop. "You're not invited to Dad's birthday cruise." That was it. No build-up. No apology. Just those 7 words, sharp and smug, delivered by my older sister Heather like she was doing me a favor. I remember sitting there at the dinner table, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I had just heard. My name's Lance, I'm 34, and I've always been the type to avoid drama, until it starts walking straight into my house, tracking its muddy boots across everything I've built. For context, my family's never exactly been a Norman Rockwell painting. My parents divorced when I was in high school, and since then it's felt like the family tree split in two. Dad stayed in town, quietly working his way through retirement, while Mom moved 2 states over with Heather and basically tried to pretend like the rest of us didn't exist unless it was convenient. Heather's 6 years older than me and grew up with this golden child complex that only got worse over time. While I was figuring out how to afford textbooks and rent during college, she was getting bailed out of a second failed business attempt by our mom, only to turn around and blow the money on a spa membership and a wellness retreat in Sedona. I kept my head down, worked through school with scholarships and part-time jobs, and eventually landed a solid gig in software. Nothing flashy, but stable. I bought a modest house on the outskirts of town and even helped Dad remodel his kitchen a couple years back when he threw out his back and couldn't do it himself. I never expected applause for that stuff. It's just what you do for family. Or so I thought. Heather had this way of making every family gathering feel like a court proceeding where she was judge, jury, and main character. Thanksgiving last year, she showed up 2 hours late and acted like she was doing us all a favor. When I gently asked her to call next time so we wouldn't hold dinner for no reason, she rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, Lance. It's not that serious. You're always so tense." I let it go, like always, because Dad was getting older, and I didn't want to be the reason the holidays got awkward. But something about this cruise idea didn't sit right from the start. Dad's 70th was coming up, and I knew he'd always wanted to take one of those big cruises, Caribbean, live jazz on the deck, bottomless shrimp cocktail kind of thing. I'd overheard him mention it years ago, half joking, saying, "Maybe when I hit 70, I'll finally take that ship to paradise." So I decided to make it happen. It wasn't cheap. I won't pretend it was. But I've done okay for myself. I figured it was the least I could do for the man who never missed a single basketball game, even when he was working double shifts. I spent 3 weeks researching packages, working with a travel agent, booking 5 cabins, 1 for Dad, 1 for me, 1 for Heather and her husband, 1 for our younger cousin Leo and his girlfriend. Dad always liked them, and 1 extra in case Mom decided to crawl out of her icy castle and grace us with her presence. All paid for, all planned, all set. And then, Heather called a family meeting. That phrase alone should have been the red flag. It was just the 3 of us, me, Heather, and Dad, sitting in my living room. She wore this perfectly ironed blouse and that condescending little smirk she reserves for when she thinks she's smarter than everyone else in the room. She started with fake compliments. "Lance, I know you mean well," which is always code for, "I'm about to disrespect you." Then she said she'd been thinking it over and felt that it would be better for Dad if it were a more intimate trip, just her husband, and Dad. Apparently, my presence would disrupt the vibe of the trip. I blinked. "What vibe?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "It's a cruise, not a yoga retreat." She crossed her arms. "You just have a way of making things uncomfortable. You're always watching, judging, acting like you're above everyone." I laughed. Out loud. I couldn't help it. "You mean I don't let you walk all over me like a doormat?" Dad looked awkward, rubbing his forehead like this whole thing was giving him a headache. "Come on, kids. Can't we just all go and enjoy ourselves?" But Heather wasn't done. "This is about what's best for Dad. And honestly, you don't even really talk to Mom anymore, so it's not like the family's whole. It makes more sense for you to sit this one out." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You do realize I booked and paid for this cruise, right?" She shrugged. "You can still give it to us. It's Dad's trip, not yours." There it was. The entitlement. Like I owed her my money, my effort, my time. Like she was doing me a favor by letting me step aside gracefully. I turned to Dad, half expecting him to say something. Anything, to push back. But he just gave this weak little sigh and muttered, "I don't want any drama, son. Maybe it's just easier this way." Easier. Right. That was the moment something in me shifted. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was disappointment. Deep, aching disappointment. I'd spent weeks planning this. Spent thousands of dollars. And here was my sister, rewriting the narrative to make me the problem. Again. And everyone just nodded along. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just stood up, went to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was shaking. My thoughts were running laps in my head, each one louder than the last. I looked back at Heather, still smug in her seat, already talking about itinerary changes and excursions. Dad just looked tired, resigned. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight for a seat on a ship I paid for. I wasn't going to beg for inclusion from people who saw me as a convenience or a credit card. If they wanted a cruise without me, they'd get exactly what they asked for. Only, it wouldn't be quite the dream trip they imagined. But I didn't say that out loud. Not yet. I just smiled, nodded, and said, all right, if that's what you want. It's wild how fast someone can switch from passive-aggressive to openly aggressive once they think you've rolled over. After that family meeting, I honestly thought I'd get a follow-up call, maybe even a half-hearted apology from Dad once Heather was out of the room. Something like, you know she didn't mean it like that, or, I appreciate what you did, son, even if she doesn't. But nope. Days passed. Then a week. Silence. Instead, I got a group chat invite. The name of the group? Dad's Cruise, Itinerary and Plans. Heather added me, along with her husband, my cousin Leo, his girlfriend, and, most insultingly, Dad. Like I was some event planner who needed to be kept in the loop on the party I wasn't invited to. No context. No. Hey, sorry again for how that conversation went. Just Heather spamming the chat with links to excursions, spa packages, and matching t-shirts with 70 and sailing printed across the front. I wish I was joking. I didn't reply. I just watched. And the more I watched, the more I saw how deeply this little illusion had taken hold. Heather acted like this was all her idea, dropping lines like, so glad we pulled this off for Dad. Or he's going to cry when he sees the surprise party on board. Never mind that the only reason this whole trip existed was because I'd built it from scratch. No mention of that. Not even a hint of acknowledgement. Leo DM'd me on the side the next day. Dude, what's going on? Why aren't you coming? I told him the truth. That Heather decided I was a bad vibe, and that I'd been uninvited. He was shocked, kept saying, that doesn't sound right, and offered to talk to her. I told him not to bother. I could see where this was heading, and I didn't want to be the guy begging for scraps of consideration from people who had already written me off. That should have been it. That should have been the breaking point, right? But no. The real gut punch came a few days later. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was finishing up meal prep for the week. Nothing fancy, just grilled chicken and roasted veggies, when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Facebook. Heather had tagged me in a post. That immediately sent up red flags. Heather never tags me in anything. Not birthdays. Not holidays. Nothing. So I opened it with caution. It was a photo collage. Old pictures of Dad holding baby Heather, Heather and Dad at her graduation, Heather and Dad fishing when she was a teen, Heather at her wedding with Dad walking her down the aisle. Not one photo of me. The caption? So blessed to have grown up with the most incredible father. Can't wait to give him the birthday of his dreams next week. You deserve the world, Dad. Hashtag family first, hashtag grateful daughter, hashtag 70 and sailing. I just stood there in my kitchen, phone in hand, staring at that screen like I'd been slapped. The comments poured in. Friends and distant relatives congratulating her, calling her such a good daughter, saying things like, you're so thoughtful, Heather, and wish we had a daughter like you. And then I saw it. Buried among the comments, someone asked, wait, didn't Lance plan this? Heather replied, nope. I had the idea months ago. Lance offered to help, but he decided not to come. It's better this way. He's complicated. Complicated. That one word undid me. I didn't even realize I'd sat down on the floor until my cat came wandering over, nuzzling my knee. My ears were ringing. My head felt like it was full of static. I thought about all the times I'd bent over backwards to make things work, to keep the peace, to avoid turning into the bitter sibling who keeps score. But apparently, none of that mattered. I was complicated. And Dad, not a single like. Not a single comment. Not even a text to check in. I didn't sleep that night. My brain just kept replaying the last few months. Heather slowly rewriting the narrative. Dad quietly letting it happen. And me, just watching. watching while they cut me out and patted themselves on the back for it. Monday morning, I woke up with the same thought echoing in my mind. Pull it all. I'd been dragging my feet on the cancellations, partly because I wasn't ready to believe they'd go through with this, and partly because a small, stupid part of me thought they'd come to their senses. But that part of me was gone now, dead and buried beneath Heather's #narcissism. I logged into the cruise line portal. All 5 cabins still untouched. Fully refundable until Wednesday. All under my name. I clicked cancel reservation on each one, watching as the itinerary fell apart piece by piece. Then I called the travel agent and asked her to forward me the final refund confirmation. She sounded surprised, said, "I thought this was for your father's birthday?" "Yeah," I said, "but turns out I'm not invited." She was quiet for a beat before replying, "I'll process it right away." Done. But the real breaking point wasn't the cancellations. It was what came after. That Wednesday, I stopped by Dad's house to drop off a new cordless drill I'd picked up for him. He mentioned a while back that his old one was sputtering, and I figured, despite everything, maybe this could be a gesture, a peace offering, or maybe I just wanted to look him in the eye. He opened the door with his usual tired smile, stepping aside to let me in. The living room was cluttered with folded laundry and mail. Cruise brochures were stacked on the coffee table, a yellow highlighter mark circling one of the ports in Cozumel. I handed him the drill in a gift bag. "Just thought you could use a better one." He smiled, genuine this time. "Thanks, son. That's thoughtful." We sat down for a bit, talking about nothing, sports, the weather, local construction drama. Then, after a long silence, I said, "Saw Heather's post." He looked away. "Yeah, she went a little overboard." "Overboard?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You know it's not true, right? That she planned this? That I just decided not to come?" He didn't answer, just kept picking at the seam on his jeans. Finally, he said, "She's just excited. You know how she is." "Yeah, I do." I stood up, grabbing my keys. "Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to drop that off." He looked up. "Wait, you're still going on the trip, right? You'll be at the port on Saturday?" I stared at him. "You think I'm still paying for it?" His face changed then. A flicker of panic, like a kid realizing the toy he broke isn't going to fix itself. "Lance, come on. Don't make this ugly. Your sister's just trying to do something nice." Maybe she didn't say it right, but "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "This isn't about how she said it. It's about the fact that she meant it. She wanted me gone, and you let her." He didn't respond, just stared down at his hands. "They're not going anywhere," I added. "The cruise is canceled." I pulled the funding. His head snapped up. "You what?" "You heard me. Lance, you can't. People already took time off work. Heather's been planning." I laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "You mean I've been planning?" "I booked it. I paid for it. I even arranged the onboard birthday party you didn't know about." Silence. I stepped back toward the door. "Enjoy your Saturday. I'll be at home. Complicated people like me don't belong on dream trips, remember?" And with that, I left. By the time I got back to my car, my phone was already buzzing with notifications. Heather had just found out. And the meltdown. Oh, the meltdown was glorious. If you've ever had the ground pulled out from under you, you'll understand this part of the story. There's a strange silence that follows, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful, but heavy, like the world has gone on spinning, and somehow you're the only one standing still. That was me for the next few weeks. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even numb. I was just quiet. Like the crash had already happened, and now I was sifting through the rubble trying to figure out what, if anything, was still intact. Heather's meltdown was spectacular, of course. It started with a barrage of missed calls, 10 in the span of 2 hours. She left voicemails, some sweet, some borderline hysterical, all of them drenched in passive aggression. "Lance, we need to talk. This is really childish. Are you seriously doing this to Dad? I'm giving you one chance to fix this before everyone finds out what kind of person you really are." That last one made me laugh. One chance. Like I hadn't given her dozens over the years. Like I hadn't spent the last decade playing family therapist, accountant, emotional punching bag, all while she crafted this golden child image for the world to applaud. Then came the texts. Long paragraphs from her. Angry messages from her husband. Even a guilt-soaked one from Mom, whom I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years, saying she was disappointed in my behavior. I almost texted back, "Glad to know you're alive, Mom." But I didn't, because none of it mattered. And Dad? Radio silence. That's what hurt the most. I expected anger from Heather, but I expected confusion from Dad, or maybe regret. I thought he might call, say something like, I didn't know how far this had gone. Or even, maybe I should have spoken up. But I got nothing. No missed calls. No texts. Not even a hey, are you okay? So I shut off my phone for a while. Not forever. Just enough to clear my head. I stopped going on Facebook. Deleted Instagram. I avoided the usual family haunts. No stopping by Dad's on Sundays. No more birthday cards in the mail. No token gestures. I didn't even tell them when my promotion came through in early March. Senior project manager. A bump in pay. A bigger team. More travel. It should have felt like a victory. But it felt hollow. Like the person I wanted to tell wasn't someone who deserved to hear it anymore. Still, I wasn't about to sink into self-pity. I started putting that energy somewhere else. The first thing I did? I took a solo trip. I know that sounds cliché. Single man scorned by family takes a healing vacation. But I didn't go to find myself. I went to remember who I was before I kept sacrificing myself to keep peace that was never real. I chose a small island off the coast of Belize. Not a flashy resort. Just a little cottage with a hammock and a dirt path that led to the ocean. No itinerary. No group chat. No matching t-shirts. The first few days were weird. I kept reaching for my phone, half expecting some passive-aggressive message from Heather or a sudden apology from Dad that never came. But the silence, once I leaned into it, was golden. I slept more than I had in months. Read 2 full books. Spent entire afternoons just listening to the waves and thinking about absolutely nothing. And then one morning, about 4 days in, I took a boat out with a local guide to go snorkeling along the reef. It wasn't anything dramatic, no life-changing speech or epiphany, but I remember this one moment where I was floating above this huge school of bright blue tangs, just suspended in clear water, sunlight pouring down in ribbons. And I thought this is what peace feels like. It wasn't a cruise ship. It wasn't a 7-course meal or fake gratitude or staged surprise parties. It was just honest, quiet, mine. When I got home, things felt different. Still broken, but I'd stopped trying to fix what wasn't mine to repair. Instead, I started building. At work, I leaned into my new role, took on bigger projects, mentored 2 interns, and even got asked to speak at a tech conference that summer. It felt good to be seen for what I brought to the table, not for my proximity to someone louder. I also started a side project. Just something for me. A friend had been bugging me for years to help him build an app for freelancers trying to manage contracts and payments without getting stiffed. We finally launched the beta in June, and within a month, we had over 1,000 users. I wasn't shouting any of this from the rooftops. I didn't post about it, didn't send out emails to brag, but it felt like the first time in years I was living my life for me, not for their approval, not to prove anything. Meanwhile, the family group chat had gone eerily quiet. I didn't block anyone. I just muted them. Occasionally I'd glance at it, usually out of morbid curiosity. There were still messages from Heather, trying to paint herself as the victim of my emotional instability. At one point she wrote, I just wanted Dad to have one good birthday. Lance made it about himself as usual. No one challenged her. Not even Dad. But I noticed something interesting. Leo wasn't chiming in anymore either. Neither was his girlfriend. And then one day, I got a text from Leo. Just 4 words. You did the right thing. That was it. But it was enough. It reminded me that truth doesn't need to be loud to be real. And that sometimes silence is a boundary, not a wound. Around August, things took a turn I didn't see coming. I was at a networking event downtown when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see a colleague, but it was Claire, my ex-girlfriend. The only serious relationship I'd had in the last 5 years. We'd broken up 2 years earlier, amicably, when our timelines just didn't line up. She smiled. Still drinking black coffee and solving problems? I laughed. Still pretending you like IPA? We talked for an hour. Then 2. Then she invited me to join her and a few friends at a rooftop bar nearby. That night turned into a string of texts. Then a coffee. Then a dinner. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. Just 2 people seeing if the timing was finally right. I didn't tell her everything about the cruise fiasco right away. But when I eventually did, she didn't gasp or act shocked. She just listened. Then she said, that's not on you. That's what happens when people get too used to taking and never expect you to say no. And that hit me harder than anything. Because that was the truth I'd been dodging for years. I had trained my family to see me as a resource, not a person. And the moment I drew a line, they called it betrayal. But here I was, standing, thriving, even. The house I used to walk through like a ghost now felt like mine again. I started redecorating, painted the walls, replaced old furniture, added some color. I framed a photo from that trip to Belize and hung it above my desk. A reminder of that silent, glowing moment in the sea when I finally remembered who I was. I even reconnected with a few old college friends I hadn't seen in years. Started game nights, invited them over for barbecues, built something real, brick by brick, outside the shadow of my family's chaos. But all stories, even the quiet ones, have a way of circling back. It was late September when the next chapter landed in my inbox. A wedding invitation. From Heather. Printed in gold script with all the usual flair. A destination wedding in the mountains. Black tie. 3 days of events. A handwritten note included. Lance, I hope we can put the past behind us. I'd love for you to be there. It would mean a lot to Dad. That last part? That was the trigger. Because she wasn't reaching out to me. She was using him again. Holding him up like a shield, like a pawn. As if the months of silence, of lies, of entitlement, had never happened. But I didn't respond. Not right away. I sat with it. I watched how my heartbeat barely changed. I realized I wasn't scared of them anymore. I wasn't afraid of what they'd think, or say, or do. Because I had something they didn't. Peace. But I also had something else. Leverage. It's funny how invitations can feel like traps when they're wrapped in gold foil. Heather's wedding invite sat on my kitchen counter for over a week. Every time I walked by, I felt it looking at me. Waiting. Not like an olive branch, but a test. And Heather didn't send it to make peace. She sent it because she thought I'd healed enough to fall back in line. That I'd see the words "it would mean a lot to Dad" and come crawling back for another round of guilt and manipulation. But I wasn't the same Lance she last saw. Not anymore. The last few months had stripped away everything I thought I needed to feel like part of a family, validation, tradition, approval, and left me with something much sturdier, clarity. Heather had made it clear how she saw me. Dad had made it clear whose side he was willing to stay quiet on. And now that I wasn't playing the role of family fixer, I had something I'd never had before. Time, energy, and absolutely nothing to lose. So I started planning. Not the petty kind of revenge. No pranks, no drunken wedding speeches, no dramatic public confrontations. That would have given them too much satisfaction, proof that I was still emotional, still complicated. No, this had to be surgical, strategic, and most of all, clean. The first piece of the puzzle came from a conversation I had with Leo, my cousin. We hadn't spoken much since his short, supportive text back during the cruise fiasco. But when the wedding invite went out, he texted again. Guess you got the golden ticket too? Still deciding what to do with it. I replied. She's saying you begged to come. I blinked. Come again. Said you apologized. Wanted to make things right. That you're finally learning to let go of the past. My fingers hovered over my screen. It shouldn't have surprised me. This was vintage Heather. Rewriting history like it was a personal journal only she had access to. I haven't said a word to her since March. Yeah, I figured. Want to talk? We met that Friday at a quiet bar near his office. It was one of those low-lit places with leather booths and no music, just the soft clink of glass and murmurs of conversation. Leo looked tired, like someone who'd been carrying secrets a little too long. Look, he said, stirring his drink. I'm not trying to stir the pot, but I'm kind of done pretending everything's normal, you know? Your sister's got this whole alternate reality going on, and people are either too scared or too tired to call her out. She always had that gift, I muttered. He nodded. Thing is, it's starting to affect other people too. She's got Dad wrapped around her finger. Again, ever since the cruise thing, she's been in his ear about consolidating his assets, helping him get organized. I felt my stomach tighten. His will. Leo gave me a knowing look. Among other things, she's talking to his lawyer now, pushing to simplify everything, whatever that means. I wouldn't be surprised if she's trying to lock down power of attorney. That hit like a sucker punch. I'd spent the last year trying to detach emotionally, trying not to care. But this wasn't just about control. It was about legacy, about erasing me from the story entirely. And suddenly, I knew exactly how to fight back. Not by yelling, not by demanding anything, but by gathering receipts. I started with Dad's old financial advisor, A guy named Rick who used to come by our house back when I was in college. I still had his card. Hoarder habits finally paying off. I gave him a call under the guise of checking on retirement strategies, and we met at his office a few days later. He remembered me instantly. Lance. Man, haven't seen you since you had that awful goatee. Thanks for bringing that up, I laughed, shaking his hand. We made small talk for a while, then I eased into it. Hey, just curious, do you still handle Dad's accounts? Rick's smile dimmed slightly. I did, until recently. He moved everything under Heather's husband's management firm. That wasn't what I expected. He didn't mention that. I said casually. Yeah, it was all kind of abrupt. They came in with a power of attorney letter and everything. Said he wanted family managing things. Did he actually come in? Rick hesitated. Briefly. He looked tired. Confused. Didn't say much. Heather and her husband did most of the talking. There it was. I didn't push further. I thanked him, told him I appreciated the info, and left with my heart pounding. If they'd pushed that paperwork through while Dad was out of it, even just overwhelmed or distracted, that could be legally murky. But I wasn't a lawyer, so I found one. Enter Naomi. She wasn't just any lawyer. She was a former classmate of mine from college who now specialized in elder care and estate protection. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I reached out and explained the situation, she agreed to meet for lunch. She was sharp, blunt, exactly what I needed. After I laid everything out, she tapped her fingers on the table and said, "This smells like financial manipulation, especially if your dad wasn't in a fully informed state of mind. Can we prove that? Maybe. Depends on medical records, timestamps, emails, recordings. You got any? Not yet. Start gathering. And don't let them know you're looking." I went into full recon mode. I started by calling the cruise company again, asking for archived emails and confirmations under my booking name. They were happy to oblige. Then I dug through my own email history, pulling out receipts, payment logs, and even screenshots of the group chat Heather created, which clearly showed her taking credit after everything was already booked. I compiled it all, created a timeline, cross-referenced the date Heather claimed I opted out of the cruise with the date she started contacting Dad's lawyer. And a pattern started to emerge. Every time I withdrew from the family, whether by force or choice, Heather swooped in and made a grab. Not just for attention, but for access, control, reputation. It was all about image. And that's when it hit me. If Heather's power was built on narrative, on spinning herself as the golden daughter, the devoted caretaker, then the way to dismantle her wasn't through confrontation. It was through exposure. But I needed the right moment. And what better moment than the wedding? I wasn't going to storm the aisle or sabotage the venue. No, I had something better in mind. Something Heather could never predict because it wouldn't come from me at all. Remember that app I'd helped build for freelancers? Well, it turned out one of our early users was a videographer named Mitch. He specialized in weddings, but also moonlighted in documentary work. We'd chatted a few times during user feedback calls and gotten along well. So I called him. "I've got a weird ask," I said. "Hit me. Are you open to, I don't know, a project? Something kind of exposed style? Legal, but sharp. You want to make a documentary about your sister's wedding?" I laughed. Not about the wedding. Just capturing a story around it. He paused. "You're going to have to be way more specific." So I told him everything. The cruise. The power of attorney. The lies. The manipulation. And by the end of it, he just said, "Holy crap. Yeah, I'm in." We planned everything carefully. Mitch would attend the wedding not as a guest, but as a second shooter for the hired videography team. Easy enough to coordinate. He'd done freelance for their agency before. He'd capture the standard footage, but also keep a running side project. Interviews with certain guests, if they were willing, and atmospheric footage to help tell the larger story. I'd do the heavy lifting. I'd reach out to people Heather had stepped on. Old friends, forgotten cousins, even Dad's former coworkers who remembered the days when I was the one showing up with groceries after his back surgery. The goal wasn't to humiliate her. It was to document the truth. Quietly, carefully, fact by fact. And once it was ready, well, let's just say the wedding wouldn't be the only thing making headlines in our family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the day of the wedding was fast approaching. And everything, every recording, every testimony, every receipt, was falling into place. All I needed now was one last piece. Dad. Because for all the planning in the world, none of it would matter if he didn't remember, didn't see, Didn't believe. So I did the one thing I hadn't done in months. I knocked on his door, and when he opened it, blinking in surprise, I said 3 words. We need to talk. Dad stared at me like he was looking at a ghost he wasn't sure he remembered. His hand trembled a little on the doorknob. I hadn't been on his porch since the day I walked out after telling him the cruise was canceled. The air between us was stiff, loaded with months of silence and the weight of everything unsaid. Lance, he finally murmured. You look different. I am, I said. Can I come in? He stepped aside, and I walked into a living room that felt smaller than I remembered. The same familiar recliner, the same coffee mug on the table, the same faint scent of wood polish. But something else clung to the space, something heavy. Resignation. Maybe guilt. He sat down slowly, hands folded. Your sister. This isn't about Heather, I said, taking a seat across from him. Not yet. He blinked, confused. Then what's this about? I took out the folder. The one I'd spent weeks building. Thick with bank logs, emails, photos, and receipts. A paper trail of truth. I need to ask you something important, I said carefully. When you signed the power of attorney for Heather, did you fully understand what you were signing? His eyebrows pulled together. Power of attorney? I didn't. She just brought some forms to help with finances. I thought it was, automatic stuff. Dad, I said softly, she transferred all of your accounts. Every one of them. And she put restrictions on access. His face went slack. What? I told her not to change anything. I thought she was organizing paperwork. There it was. The truth I'd suspected but needed to hear. He wasn't complicit. He was kept in the dark. I slid the documents toward him, watching his hands shake as he picked through each page. His breathing changed, shallow, slow, then sharp. The way someone breathes when a long-buried reality cracks open. Why would she do this? He whispered, voice breaking. Why would my own daughter? Because she knew you trusted her, I said. And because she thought no one would challenge her. He looked up at me then, a mixture of shame and disbelief in his eyes. Son, I didn't know. I swear. I would never choose her over you like that. I just didn't want the fighting. And by trying to avoid it, I said gently, you handed her the weapon. He winced, but he didn't deny it. I leaned forward. Dad, I can fix this. But I need you to trust me, fully. Not halfway. Not quietly. I need your voice, clearly spoken, on record. He nodded, slow but resolute. Tell me what to do. And so we started. With Naomi's help, Dad revoked the power of attorney and filed a formal legal challenge against the unauthorized transfers. A doctor documented the timeline of his cognitive fatigue, stress, medication changes, and emotional pressure, all of which were relevant in determining capacity. Rick, his former advisor, wrote a statement verifying that Heather and her husband had pushed the paperwork aggressively. Piece by piece, the foundation of Heather's control began to crack. Now it was time for the wedding. The ceremony was in the mountains, tucked behind a luxury lodge with a view straight out of a postcard. I arrived early, not as a guest, but as the quiet storm no one saw coming. Heather spotted me near the check-in desk, wearing a crisp suit and a calm expression she absolutely did not expect. Her jaw tightened. You made it, she said through a forced smile. Even after everything. Dad invited me. I replied. This was true. Once Dad learned the full truth, he insisted on attending the wedding. Not to celebrate her, but to confront her. And when he asked me to come, not out of obligation but out of trust, I agreed. Her eyes narrowed. Well, just please don't start anything today. This is supposed to be a happy moment. Oh, I wouldn't dream of interrupting your day, I said. And I meant it. Someone else would. Mitch was already there, posing as a member of the videography team, his equipment blending in seamlessly. His real work would happen later, after the wedding, when we put all the interviews, documents, and footage together. But for now, he was capturing every small detail. How Heather barked orders at staff, how she snapped at her bridesmaids, how she micromanaged every angle of her own spotlight. The ceremony was lavish. Flowers everywhere. A string quartet. Guests fanning themselves with programs that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Heather floated down the aisle like she owned the mountain itself. But beneath all of that was a current she didn't see, one that would sweep her entire kingdom away before the night was over. The real explosion happened during the reception. It started with the toasts. Her husband's best man gave a clumsy speech full of inside jokes no one understood. People clapped politely. Then a bridesmaid told an overly sentimental story about Heather overcoming adversity, which made Heather dab at her eyes with a napkin, soaking in the attention. Then Dad stood up. Heather's smile froze instantly. "Dad," she said under her breath, "I told you to let Mark close the speeches." Dad walked slowly to the microphone. He wasn't dressed in anything flashy, just a simple suit, clean-shaven, hair combed. But there was something different about him. He looked steady. He tapped the mic once. The room fell quiet. "I won't take much of your time," he began. "I only want to say a few words, not about the couple, but about family." Heather stiffened. Dad continued, voice strong and clear. "Family isn't built on perfection. It's not built on appearances. It's built on trust. And in the last year, I've learned the hard way what happens when trust is misplaced." A murmur rippled through the room. Heather stepped toward him. "Dad, stop. This isn't." He held up a hand. "You told me to sign forms I didn't understand. You moved my accounts without my consent. You cut your brother out of a trip he planned and paid for. And then you lied to cover your tracks." Silence. Pure, stunned silence. Heather's face drained of color. "That's not. Dad, you're confused. He's twisting things." "No," Dad said, voice unshakable. "For the first time in a long time. I'm not." He looked straight at me. "Lance, I'm sorry. For all of it." My throat tightened. I didn't move, but something inside me finally did. Dad turned back to the crowd. "And I won't stay silent anymore." I didn't realize how loud the room had gotten. Whispers, gasps, chairs scraping, until the wedding coordinator rushed over, trying desperately to calm the chaos. But the storm had already hit. Heather's husband stormed onto the stage. "Okay, that's enough. This is slander. It's documented," I said, stepping forward at last. "And it's already been filed. Financial manipulation, unauthorized asset transfers, coercion." Mitch, right on cue, lifted his camera, not dramatically, not aggressively. Just enough for Heather to realize this wasn't going away. Her eyes widened. "You recorded? Lance, what have you done?" "Nothing," I said calmly. "I just stopped letting you rewrite the truth." She stumbled backward, mouth opening and closing. Tears welled, but they weren't the soft ones from earlier. They were jagged, torrential, the kind that spill out when the mask finally cracks. Her husband grabbed her arm. "We need to fix this. Talk to the lawyer, call." "You might want to check who Dad's lawyer is now," I said. "It's not yours." The realization was instant. The fallout was immediate. Guests quietly excused themselves. Bridesmaids avoided eye contact. Her new in-laws whispered furiously in a corner. And Heather, golden child, family's son, queen of the pedestal, stood in the middle of her own reception like someone had pulled the ground right out from under her. We didn't stay for dessert. Dad walked out beside me, shoulders lighter than I'd seen in years. When we reached my car, he exhaled shakily. "She used me," he said, voice low. "She did," I replied. "But you woke up. That's what matters." He nodded. "Son, thank you." I didn't need the words, but I let him say them. Over the next months, everything collapsed for Heather. The power of attorney was officially revoked. The financial transfers were reversed. Her husband's firm came under review for ethical violations. And the documentary? We didn't publish it publicly. It wasn't about ruining her reputation forever. It was about the truth. But we did send it to every family member she'd lied to. Once they saw the real story, undeniable, chronological, documented, every pedestal she'd built crumbled. Calls stopped. Invitations stopped. Her audience disappeared. For the first time in her life, Heather was left standing alone. As for me, I gained something I never expected. Real, quiet freedom. On a warm afternoon a year later, Dad and I took a fishing trip, the kind we hadn't shared since I was a kid. The lake was calm, the birds loud, and the sun warm on my shoulders. Dad cast his line and said, almost shyly, "You think things will ever feel normal again?" I thought about it. Everything we'd lived through. Everything we'd rebuilt. And I smiled. "This is normal," I said. "This is enough." He nodded, and the water rippled softly between us. And that's how it ended. Not with shouting, not with triumph, not with applause, but with the simple, steady truth that finally belonged to me. Sometimes the strongest revenge is becoming someone they can no longer control and someone they can no longer reach.